Welcome again to the SORC Finance workshop this evening. We're going to talk about financing a student organization, and we just appreciate you showing up, your willingness to learn and be in community with us this evening. To go through, we're going to go through a brief welcome and what's on the agenda. So we have our land acknowledgement, and then we're going to talk briefly about what SORC is and who we are. Some logistics for today's workshop. We're going to do a brief introduction of our guest speaker and then everything SORC Finance. And we'll conclude with some final questions at the very end. So feel free throughout to put your questions in the chat or to unmute yourself if it makes sense to do so. But we will have some time at the end as well. So, as I was saying before I unmuted myself, we'll start with the land acknowledgement because we think it is a great grounding and centering exercise to start everything off, especially as not everyone is in the College Park area. We recognize that because of the pandemic, folks are spread across the country and maybe even world, and it's important to acknowledge the land that we are occupying currently. And so I'll read the statement verbatim. Every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, and some were drawn to migrate from their homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. At the Student Organization Resource Center, we believe it is important to create dialogue to honor those that have been historically and systematically disenfranchised. So, we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respects to the Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration that is, and settlement that bring us here today. And so in this slide, you will see a map, and it is the land acknowledgement map that we like to use. And so you should be receiving a link in the chat to it. And if you open it up, it's a great activity to use for icebreakers or just to acknowledge the land when you start group meetings, class, or different gatherings. And so if you zoom in, when you get to the website, you can see all throughout North America, the land that was held by indigenous peoples before we arrived. And so to start off, who is SORC? So these folks are the lovely people that make up SORC, myself included. In the middle there, you see Ashley Veneman, who is the manager of student org development. And then on the sides, on the left side, that is, Foster McDaniel, who is on the call today. He is the coordinator for student org development. And then myself, I am on the right, and I'm the graduate assistant for student org development as well. And we are the full-time staff in the office that help, and then we also have our student staff. So make sure that you stop in anytime. So we mentioned our student staff. Those lovely people there on your top left are individuals who make SORC possible. They are student workers, and they sit at the front desk. So when you come in, you'll most likely engage with them first, and then maybe Foster, Ashley, or myself. We are located in the Adele H. Stamp Student Union, there in the top right, and then in the bottom, that long picture is the student involvement suite. And we are actually open, so feel free to come in person and join us. Obviously, you'll have to wear your mask and remain physically distant, but we do encourage you to still use our space. We are starting to print again, so if you have printing requests, let us know. But we are open, so come join us. Also, if you don't feel comfortable joining us in person, that is okay. We encourage you to join us on our website. So we have a live chat feature, and during our business hours, it will be staffed. So if you have a quick question and you don't want to call or you don't want to stop by, just hop on and chat with us. But our physical office hours are there Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 p.m., and then Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 5. a little bit about what SORC does. So we do a little bit of all these things. We do programming, so first and second look fair. Second look fair just happened last week. We do developmental workshops like these. We also have engaging programming, such as that we participate in, such as all-nighter, Turks After Dark, and different events. And then we also do logistical things such as room reservation, printing access, which I mentioned earlier, lockers management, resource room, and many other things under that logistical column. And then we also have our budgeting arm, SORC Finance, which we'll talk a little bit about later because they are the ones putting on this workshop. But we have SORC Finance. They work with motor pool, transportation requests, contracts, banking, all things to deal with money. You can find us on the web at stamp.umd.edu, where you can find more on registered student organizations, contact information, events that are happening. You can also follow us at Maryland SORC on Instagram, and we post pretty frequently, so you'll see from us there. And then we also have our newsletter, which is The Word, and so that goes out every Tuesday, and so we encourage you to subscribe to that, as it has up-to-date information from student orgs, events happening on campus, and all things, you know, student org related that you might need to know to operate. And so for the workshop this evening, just some logistics, it is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube after this event this evening. So if you need to reference it again, you can always rewatch a segment of it. Also, we ask that you mute yourself when you're not speaking. You can turn on your cameras. We welcome you to do that if you would like. And then ask questions that you may have. Please, please. We invite your questions. We will be monitoring the chat. So we'll try to address all of your questions. And like I said earlier, we'll have time for them at the end as well. But now is my pleasure to turn it over to our good friend and dear colleague, Val, who is the business manager for SORC Finance. And so she will be leading the workshop this evening. She is such a knowledgeable person in our office, and we really encourage you to get to know her and her staff. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll turn it over to Val.
Thank you, Nathan. And thanks to all of you for coming. There's a lot of you. I'm very excited to see that. Here's what I'm going to do. I got a lot to cover. I am going to try and cover everything in a very brief fashion and specific questions because since we're covering a wide range of topics, this would be a much longer workshop if we were going to go into detail about any one topic. So I want to at least try and cover sort of everything that SORC Finance is and things that you're probably interested in. And we've got a lot of reasons to share with you for more information, and also just tell you how you can reach out to us to get more information specific to your club. So let's start by just sharing the presentation. So why isn't it going into present mode? Let's go back. So real quickly, we already talked about who we are. I think that Nathan did a great job of talking about who SORC is. In reality, SORC and SORC Finance, where we, in reality, part of the same team. The thing that makes SORC Finance just a little bit different, and probably why we distinguish ourselves differently from SORC is, and you should know this, is that SORC Finance is fully funded by the SGA. We originally were created, SORC used to be all things, all student groups. It used to be an office of 2 people, and we managed your accounts and the registrations, but we were primarily there to manage the funds that SGA allocates to student groups. And as such, they fund our area. When we expanded to include additional staff to help us, because the number of our student organization has grown exponentially and you need a lot more staff, we separated out SORC Finance primarily but also distinctly different from the other work. So we try. We're going to talk about how you can acquire funds, not just SGA funds, but some other opportunities on campus for acquiring funds, and then briefly how to spend funds. I have a sample budget application if you're applying for SGA monies. That is usually where a lot of our questions. I'm going to save that till the end because I want to make sure that I give enough information to everybody about this. So if you're primarily interested in the SGA budget process and applications, then stick around at the end. And if that's not something you want information on, I want to give people an opportunity to bow out because that can go on.
Hey, Val, can you hear me?
I can.
We are looking at the SGA budget application. We're not seeing your presentation. I just wanted to let you know. There we go. It popped up real quick.
See, I moved it. All right, so I'm going to be looking to my left.
There we go. Perfect. It's up on the screen.
We'll stick with that. Still don't know why it's not in present mode, but you're going to forgive me. So, so I talked about who we are. I'm going to skip an organization resource center and who they are because it very well. Probably the biggest confusion is the relationship of SGA to SORC Finance. SGA is a student organization just like any of yours. So they are their own organization with their own leadership. They have been tasked and given sort of the responsibility by the university to funds to student organizations. So the process for doing that, the decisions for how that they make are solely within that organization. So if you have questions about how to apply for SGA funds, how do you become recognized to be able to, all of those questions should be directed to the SGA. And our office is after you get allocated those funds, how do you spend them? So think of a monitor as funds. I will say, because they are managing university funds, the other role that I have is to advise the finance committee to ensure that they're doing so appropriately and in line with the university's view on how the funds should be used, but they still operate independently from us in terms of their processes. So we'll go over it again, but questions about the funding, their decisions, how to apply should be directed to them. And then who money to you, we help you spend it. If you have an account with our office, I'll talk about that, how to get one a little later. We also manage other funds you may get from other departments. We give information to student organizations about opening a bank account. And again, we advise the finance committee. And just try and answer any other questions you might have related to funds. Whether we can answer them, we don't know, but we do our best. So where can you get money from? So I found this quote, that most delicious of all privileges, spending other people's money. So SGA is probably the primary source of funding because of the amount of money they have to give to student organizations. There are other, and what I like about this quote is that it is a benefit that you have, but I think one of the things you have to keep in mind is that it is money that belongs to somebody else, another department, and they do have their own kind of criteria for how you use it. And you should always keep in mind that you are spending other people's money and should do so, I guess, with an appreciation for where it came from and the rules around it. So the types of funds are SGA funds. And in the presentation, and Nathan, about a week afterwards, SORC is going to make this available on YouTube for groups. We can share with you so you can get to these links, but there is a link to SGA Finance Committee's website. I strongly encourage groups to visit it often. That's where they post updated information, what their budget deadlines are, their contact information, the rules around it, all things SGA funding. The other sources of funds, and these are by no means exhaustive, but they're the ones that we know about that are probably applicable to all student organizations on campus, and your activities are a Pepsi grant. So the university has a contract with Pepsi. They're the exclusive contract with them. And one of the arrangements the university made when they signed that contract was that Pepsi would give approximately $50,000 every semester to programming on campus. So student organizations can apply for it, departments can. That is not managed by our office. It is managed by a committee. So it's not really under the, I mean, I guess STAMP manages it, but there's a committee that manages that every year. If you have questions about how to apply, they have their own website, they have their own email address. I believe there was an application, there should be an application going out soon for next fall. My understanding is they are on hold right now if you were awarded funds for the spring, because the limits of what can be done on campus, they haven't dispersed those awards, but if you were granted awards for the spring and have questions, I would direct them to them. Then there's C. So C, if you're not familiar with them, they are also part of our team in our office. So SORC is part of the activities team in the STAMP board for the campus. They also receive funds to hold large scale events. I'm assuming you probably are aware of Art Attack. They do the Homecoming Comedy Show. But one of the other things they do with their funds is they set it aside to offer additional funding to student organizations for their programs. If you have any desire to reach out to them for funding, we have a link to their website. What I do want to let groups know about is that SGA worked with C last year to incorporate a question into the budget application to sort of streamline this process, because not every group knows about C funding. So if you fill out an SGA budget application, there's a question on there now that it's interested in C funding as well. If you click yes, if you are not fully granted, like fully funded by the SGA for your event, or you just need additional funds you can't get from the SGA, if you clicked yes on that, we will immediately forward your application to C and they will reach out to you. So you don't have to fill out another application. So we're trying to streamline that process. Then there's MICA. MICA is also a department in STAMP. So they are, they support our identity-based groups, our multicultural groups, and for cultural and cross-cultural programming. The link will take you to their website, which gives you the criteria for their funding, but that's another source. And the Do Good mini grant, I will be honest, I know very little about the criteria for it, but I know that it's available to student organizations for programs that have an impact. And they're all student-led, student-run proposals. I believe the maximum you can get for each is $500, but they're getting more and more funding and giving more and more grants. So they're another opportunity for groups. Because we have direct sort of affiliation with SGA, I'm going to focus on the SGA funding process. So the first thing that you all should be aware of is, where does the money come from that SGA gives to student groups? It comes from one of the fees that you pay every year. So it's $80 for full-time students and $40 for part-time students, and is in charge of that entire fee. And part of it goes to fund our office because we do that work. Part of it goes on the undergraduate student legal aid office, which, if you are not aware of it, is an amazing organizations. They're there to provide representation and advice to students who have been referred to student conduct. If you have any questions whatsoever that are legal challenges or legal questions, they do a lot of work with students on landlord-tenant issues. Student organizations have visited them if they are, if they're trying to write up a contract to do work or to work with another entity on campus, they'll help you with that contract. But it's all free for student organizations. They just can't represent you in a court case, but it's amazing legal advice and legal funded by the SGA through that fee. And then the remainder of it goes to allocate to student organizations. They do have guidelines that the university gives them to follow about how that fee should be used. I provided a link here. I will not go over it in detail, but the overall mission is, and is to provide money to student organizations to provide kind of diverse, all-encompassing programming on campus for the fellow undergrad students. As such, a lot of SGA's rules are gospel, and we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to the funding process. But a lot of organizations think that SGA can, make any decisions who can get money in, how they can get it, and what they can use it for. But they have to do it within these guidelines. And so it's important to know what that policy says and that it's not completely up to the SGA. But I would also encourage you to read that because it's your money. And you should know sort of what it's intended to hold SGA accountable to make sure that they're allocating it in accordance with that. Probably the most confusing thing about the SGA process is how do you become eligible to apply for funds, and then how do you apply for funds? And so I've tried to sort of line this up linearly and help you understand this. So first things first is you are not eligible to apply for SGA monies if you're not registered with SORC. So that is, getting your group registered in TerpLink. You're all here, I'm going to assume, because you got the message through TerpLink that your registration is current. But first and foremost, you do have to register with SORC to be eligible for SGA funds. The second part is meeting SGA's guidelines for being eligible for those funds. And is that one of the primary things that the policy for the student fee says is that because every student paid into the fee, then organizations who are asking for the money cannot exclude any other undergraduate from their membership. So that is one of the reasons why you're not eligible for SGA funding if you have any membership. Because SGA is in charge of the money and the budget allocation process, they're also in charge of determining whether or not you meet those recognition guidelines. So that is why it is called SGA recognition and why they manage that. We have tried to work with SGA to streamline this process. So what's important for you to know is when you're filling out there's a question in your registration that asks if you want to be considered for SGA recognition. If you indicate yes, then what our office does is we forward that information to the SGA, and then they will review it and they will follow up with your organization to let you know whether or not you meet the criteria, and if there's anything you can do to change that if you don't meet the criteria so that you are eligible. I provided a link to the SGA committee that manages the recognition process. So it's important to keep that in mind. There's a link to see whether or not your group has been recognized for this year. It gives your contact information if you have questions about that. So that's who you want to direct any questions to about the recognition process and whether your group is eligible. And the last thing that you have to do is the SGA Finance Committee, which allocates the money, does have a mandatory workshop that they ask that you attend, where they go over how do you get to the budget application, how do you fill it out, what are the rules, and there's a link later on to their website where, again, they have this year, it used to be an in-person workshop. This year they've changed it to a recorded workshop, so you can watch it anytime that you want. There's a quiz at the end just so they're sure you watched it and that you understood it. And then once you've attended the workshop, then you are eligible to submit a budget application for your group. I'm not going to tell you how to get to the budget application because it's covered in that workshop, and I wanted to focus sort of on the meatier stuff here. But again, the SGA Finance Committee website, there's a link to it in the presentation, has the workshop right on their main homepage. When is funding available? Very briefly. So there are 6 budget allocation periods a year, so 3 each semester. It takes approximately 2 weeks every month for the Finance Committee to review those, and then their decisions are not final. They have to be reviewed and approved by the SGA legislature. So it's about a 3-week process from the budget deadline to their final decision, which is why they don't have more frequent budget application deadlines. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Minimally, you have to have, when you're applying, your program or your purchase has to be at least 30 days in advance, just to give the finance committee time to make their decisions and time for us to be able to help you spend the money. And then they do have an emergency funding pool of money. That is for organizations who already applied for funds for that program or activity in a previous period and either were denied. It gives you the opportunity to resubmit your application with corrected documentation or whatever it is that needed to be fixed. Or if you had unexpected costs come up for a program that was already funded, and that only requires 10 business days in advance notice. Again, I'm going to do a brief overview, what can be funded, what can't be funded, but the SGA has a manual that goes over in much more detail. But what I wanted to cover are the two things that I think groups struggle with and that are sort of the overarching guide that the SGA uses as to whether or not to fund your program. The SGA will only fund programs, activities, or purchases that are essential for your group to carry out the mission of your organization. The reason for this is that despite the fact that it seems like a lot of money that the SGA has, in any given year, there's about 200 organizations that are asking for money. And every single deadline, the amount of money requested of the SGA far exceeds what's available to them. So the SGA is focusing on providing you funds for programs that are essential for your group to accomplish your mission so that they're able to spread that money out as much as possible. So that's not to say that programs or activities that you want to have that aren't directly related to your mission aren't valid or aren't don't have an impact for your group, but SGA is trying to fund as many groups as possible, and for those things that you absolutely need to move forward with your group. And sort of attached to that is they're only going to fund within a budget those items or expenses or purchases that are essential to that program or activity happening. The things that absolutely can't be funded is, keep in mind that even though SGA is allocating those monies, they're still university funds. So there are things you cannot spend university funds on no matter where the money's coming from. So some of them are obvious: alcohol, tobacco. They cannot purchase gift cards or any items that have a cash value like a voucher, firearms and/or ammunition. That seems random, but we do have and have in the past had some target team groups and related groups that need those items for their organization, but we're just not able to buy them because state funds cannot be used for those unless it's for, like a public safety entity like the police. Programs or activities that have an admission charge, there's an exception to that, which I can go into detail for those who need it later, will not be funded. The university expectation is that if every student paid $80 into the fee, then every activity that's funded with SGA money should be free to all student groups. That $80 is technically the admission into all those events. Also, programs and activities where the primary purpose is to raise funds for a charity, those cannot be funded. That is also a university and a state rule about how university funds can be used. University funds cannot be given to nonprofits or charities. And the last big overarching thing is any items that you want funded that are going to be what SGA calls a personal benefit of an individual cannot be funded. So for example, if your organization wants to buy t-shirts for the members of your group that the members are going to keep, they can't fund that. But they can fund maybe costumes for your organization that are going to stay with your group from year to year to year. So those are some of the biggies. Again, it's not an inclusive list, and there's a manual on SGA's website that covers everything they can and can't fund, but it's sort of the ones that are most often asked for or the questions are asked about. Again, I will have a detailed budget application at the end, but there are three things that are really important for you to focus on when filling out a budget application. Just provide as much information as possible when you fill out the budget application. The committee members literally read every single application from start to finish. And they need you to give them as much information as humanly possible about what is it you need the money for, and how does it tie back to your mission statement, and is this justified? And you never want to assume that the SGA knows things about your organization that they may not know. Remember, again, we have anywhere from 150 to 200 organizations that are applying for funds every year, and SGA probably doesn't know the details of every one of your groups. So do yourselves a favor and, write a few paragraphs if necessary. Don't write too much, but make sure that you are thinking of SGA as your audience and they don't know anything about your group, and give them as much as you can. Again, also use that time to justify why these things are essential to your group. And the last thing, which is the biggest thing, is the SGA asks for lots of documentation. This is because they need to know that the money that you're asking for is the money that you actually need. They don't ever want to allocate more to any group than you actually need, because then that money, if it doesn't get used, just sits there and doesn't benefit any other group for the rest of the year. So what they want to do is they want to make sure that what you're asking for is actually what you need. And again, I can go into more detail about this at the end of this if you want to stick around for that. It's covered in their workshop, and they give detailed information in their manual about what is good documentation and what is bad. Some helpful resources when you're working on your budget are, again, we'll share this with you, so if you don't stick around at the end, and this is what I'll go over, there's the sample budget that I put together, highlights some biggie things. So there's a link to that. There's a link to SGA's manual. I'm not going to click on that just in case. These are the top 6 reasons more recently that groups do not get funded. I think this is really important for groups to know, because that's what you really want to focus on. Number 1 is bad documentation. Number 2 is you're asking for things that are not related to the budget or the description of the program that you're applying for funds for. The date that you want the money by is not within SGA's guidelines. If you're asking for money for an event that is happening in a physical space, then they want proof that you've reserved the space or an explanation as to why it hasn't been reserved yet. Missing inventory, that's probably for groups that are asking to purchase physical items, you have to provide a list of items you already have in your possession to make sure that we're not funding things you already have for your organization. And then that admission charge, groups that are asking to charge admission without justification. And then this is here. I'm not going to go through this in detail because it's very long, but number 1, again, is that documentation. This is a document I put together, and I got SGA to review it, but it basically goes into great detail about what is good documentation, what is bad documentation, and there's lots of visual examples, explanations. So I would strongly encourage you to get that document, access it, and keep it close when you're putting your budget application together. Nathan, I know that was a lot, and I know we're going to leave time for questions. Is this a good time for me to see if anybody has questions, or should we still wait till the end?
Yeah, this is a great time for questions if folks have them. So this is a good pause. We will continue on, but if anyone has questions, please, you can ask right now or wait till the end.
Here's what I'll say. If you have very detailed questions about a budget, if you could save those till the end, because I will go over one. I'm going to try and get through these last slides quickly and focus a lot in going into detail about a budget application. But if you've got other questions, sort of broader ones, happy to answer them.
Hi, this might be something that's like more detailed or to look at the SGA website for, but if I'm doing something like a paint night, And the paintbrushes are going to be something that would in theory be passed to the club in a future year, or we would be happy to donate them to SORC after they're used. What would you say is the best way to go about that? Also for like storage locations? Yeah.
So in regards to the paintbrushes, as long as you put in your budget application that either A, you're going to leave it for your future members to use and leave in your locker, or that you'll donate them back to SORC, that's perfectly fine. And sure, I'll talk about that a little bit more in the budget. I will ask Nathan or Foster to clarify something for me. Here's the other tricky part. So because the funds that SGA gives you are university funds, everything purchased with the funds that SGA allocates to you are considered property of the university. So a lot of groups seem to think that it's SGA's rule that you have on-campus storage. That is not. That is the university's policy, and our office is sort of, technically our office is the owner of everything you buy, so we're held accountable. So when we built the suite, which is a brand new suite for all of you, you think it's probably been there forever. It has not been there forever. The number one needs of student groups before we built the suite was lockers for groups. So that is why we have a lot of them. Still not enough for all 700 plus groups, but a lot. SORC offers them free of charge. I will let Foster or Nathan chime in as to whether or not I don't think the application is currently open. I think we do that on a cycle basis, but you would apply for that locker through SORC.
For lockers, they are coming open. We are finalizing our application for the calendar year. So lockers are now assigned on a calendar year, so January to December, and you would have to reapply every year just because sometimes you don't need the locker anymore. Sometimes you need a bigger locker, and like we just want to keep a fresh updated list of who's in your org, who has it. So we'll like check our social media at Merrill and SORC. It'll be going out in the newsletter next week, so the 16th, and as well as it'll be on TurpLink announced when that application is open, and it should be open by the end of the week because we know that SGA budget applications are due Friday. So,
if you can't get a SORC locker, if for some reason they're all out of them, there isn't an easy answer to where else to go. One of the suggestions we make is asking your group's advisor whether or not they'd be willing to keep those items in their office or somewhere in their department, which is perfectly acceptable. They cannot be kept in residence halls, sorry, or the trunk of your car. Is my office walking around campus and checking all 400 or 500 groups we funded for that? We aren't, but I'm waiting for the day that a university auditor walks in and asks us, where's all that stuff? And so we ask that you try and abide by that as much as possible. If you're not sure who your advisor is, this is a whole other conversation. You're picking the right advisor for your group is key to the success of your group. That is a whole other workshop. But if you don't know who your advisor is, you don't have a good relationship with them, I would strongly encourage you to think about finding a new advisor, somebody who is invested in your group, if only to sort of be there to help your organization sort of navigate some of these processes and maybe offer their office. But I could spend hours on that and I will skip because that's a whole other conversation. Were there other
Val,
questions?
we had a question in the chat, Val. How do we access the funds we get?
That's the next topic.
Okay, well, I'll save that because we have one other question in the chat. Is there any way to get funding faster, or does it have to be at least 30 days in advance?
From the SGA, there's no way to get funds faster. So again, they have, so any given period, they have 100 to 150 budget applications submitted to them. It's a lot. So the finance committee and myself, we literally meet 3 nights a week for 4 hours each night to go through all those budget applications. And again, the rules are, so the legislature, and so after SGA releases their original decisions about your funding, every group has an opportunity to appeal that decision, and then the SGA has to approve it. So there's no way to get the money faster because the university has an expectation that that process is followed to make sure that every group is treated fairly and that we have enough time to give every group's budget application adequate time to assess whether or not it should be funded. I don't know whether or not I don't think C funding can get you the money faster. I don't know about MICA. So this is sort of, it goes back to sort of that privilege of using other people's money. It's not really our money, it's university money. So it's not just SGA's rules, but it's also making sure that, you know, whoever is giving away that money is also doing so in accordance with university policy and managing that. So unfortunately, there isn't really a quick way to get money for your organization. Not to mention the fact that once you get funded by the SGA, which is our next topic, then it's spending your money. And that has a time period to it that there is no workaround for, which I'll talk about. So even after SGA allocates those funds, it takes a little while for us to actually pay for things, just by the nature of the fact that they're university funds and aren't just sitting in our office. So
you are all good to carry on. Those are all the questions that we have currently.
Great.
But for folks who are on the call, feel free to keep putting them in the chat if you have them as Val continues on.
So how do you spend your funds? So that's what my staff does. So SORC Finance, in a good year, has 2 full-time staff and a bunch of amazing student staff. Currently, we have 1 full-time staff member, which is me. We have an open position, which is not going to be filled anytime in the near future because of the current conditions. But I still have my student staff. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, because this question gets asked a lot, how do you get an account with SORC and then how do you spend it? So the very most important thing for you to know is not every student organization is given an account with our office. And I will say that there's really no benefit to having one unless you've gotten funds from SGA. But so getting an account with our office, it's a university account. So the university has guidelines and policies around who can have an account. And for our purposes, the only organizations we are allowed to give an account to are groups who have received funding from the SGA at some point in the past. Once you've gotten an account, it stays with us forever. It's always there. But we can't just give an account to a group who has never received SGA funding. So for example, if you apply for a Pepsi grant, if you don't have an account with our office and you are granted a Pepsi grant, we cannot create an account for you to put your Pepsi grant monies into. That doesn't mean you can't spend your Pepsi monies. You work with the Pepsi grant committee to spend them, but a lot of groups think that once they get recognized to be eligible to apply for SGA funds, that you're given an account and then can get other departments to contribute money to your account, and that's not the case. Once you have an account with our office, if a department is giving you funds, so either from those avenues that I talked about earlier, the standard, MICA and C funding and Pepsi funds, some departments, if you've got a relationship with a department and they're willing to maybe contribute $100 to an upcoming program, once you have an account with our office, those departments can transfer the funds into your account with us. You cannot put non-university funds into accounts with our office. That is prohibited for any account on campus. So all university accounts are prohibited from putting outside monies in, which is why we encourage student organizations, if you're raising funds from outside fundraisers, GoFundMes, that sort of thing, that you open a bank account in your organization's name. I'm going to talk a little bit about it moving forward, but they can't be put there. They need to be put in a bank account. And then just reiterating that any funds that are in our account are considered university funds. So everything I'm going to cover here are university rules about how those monies can be spent. So they're not SORC rules, they're university rules, which is an important distinction. I feel like, because it's 5:48, we might not get to the budget, but so I'm going to cover this. Since he's going to share this, it's really important for you to know, I'm going to skip all of this because I suspect that most of you want information on the budget. And I also want to just stress that our office is available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 for any of you that want to reach out and ask these questions. But when we share this PowerPoint with you, just pay attention to what we can and can't do with the money. Again, these are not decisions that our office makes. These are decisions dictated by the university. We have no authority to make exceptions to it or bend the rules. There's just no workaround. There's 3 ways of paying people. Again, we'll skip that. What happens is as soon as you get funded by either SGA or get money from another department, my office will immediately send you an email. So it is very important to pay attention to your emails from SORC that basically says, now that you've gotten money, here's what you need to know to spend it. And we have a training that we have you go through, and then we're available to answer specific questions. And we have tons of resources. So once you get money, you get an invite from us to join a page in TerpLink called the SJ Financial Officers page, which is where we share all our information with you. We give you instructions for taking our training. After you've taken our training, I beg you to visit our website often. We have a manual on there that goes into great detail about everything that I'm sharing with you. It's taking me a minute. But literally, it talks about our training. It talks about all the different ways to pay for things, step-by-step instructions for filling out our forms. So keep that information handy and always reach out to our office. I hear all the time that groups are confused, but I don't hear it directly. And right now, it's hard to get in touch with us because my student staff are working remotely primarily. We're starting to slowly bring them back into the office, and I'm only physically in the office 1 or 2 days a week. So what I'd like you to do, reach out to us by email, sorcfinance@umd.edu. And if you want to have a conversation with me, I'm happy to set up a meeting and have a conversation. But we have staff monitoring our email every day from 9 to 5. If we can answer by email, we will. If you want to talk to somebody, we will make sure that you set up a conversation to talk with somebody. Bank accounts for student groups. The most important thing for you to know is the university and our office have absolutely nothing to do with your bank account. If you choose to open a bank account, you do so on your own. We have no oversight. We can't access it. We encourage you to have one for your group and not use your personal bank account to keep money. Never, never, never keep your group's money in your personal bank account. Because depending on how much money you may or may not make in a given year, it can be considered income for you personally and can have tax implications. But what we do, knowing that you have a need for a bank account, is we try and provide as much information as we can on our website about what it means to have a bank account and what you may or may not need. So I would also strongly encourage you to go to our website. There's a whole page on bank accounts. Right now, up until about a year ago, there was no bank inside the stamp. There hadn't been one for over 5 years. We now have one. We have M&T. There's a branch there. I've met with their staff. They're beyond eager to meet with student organizations and talk to you about what it means to open an account with them, what you need to open an account with them. They're right across the hall from us. You do not have to open an account with M&T, but it is convenient. And some groups have used CQ and Capital One because they were banks that the university and Stamp had relationships with in the past. So you may have heard that. But again, you can choose any of those 3 branches or any other bank that you wish. The one thing we can provide, is a bank letter for M&T, CQ, and possibly Capital One. I won't go to detail. If they ask you for a bank letter from SORC, we have a form on TerpLink. All you have to do is fill it out, gives us your name, the other signers you want on there, and the name of your group, and as long as your registration is current, so that's important. We just have a letter we provide you the same day on our letterhead that tells the bank that you are actively registered and that the people you want to be put on the account are listed as members of your group. Because we don't want to give permission to a bank to give access to your money for people that aren't members of your group. And I wanted 7 minutes for a budget may not be enough, but I'll stop here if there were questions specific to spending money or bank accounts. No, are we good, Nathan?
There was one question in the chat. I think you addressed it pretty well, though. How should we open a bank account? How should one go about that? I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, Val, but that was the only other question that we had.
All I'm going to do is encourage you to read everything on our website about bank accounts from the top to the bottom. I know it looks like a lot of information. It's information we've learned. I didn't know anything about what it means to open a bank account for a student organization until the university partnered with CQ about 5 years ago. And it was an amazing partnership we had, and sadly it's over, where they gave lots of workshops. So what's in the information on our website is information I learned from CQ that's just in general about bank accounts. It explains in great detail what a tax ID number is, all things you should know, but more importantly, that just meet with somebody at the bank. So read the website and then say to yourself, I mean, I would assume you're going to want to open a bank account if it's new with M&T, because they're right there and they are incredibly helpful. So just ask if you can find time to sit down and meet with them and ask them all the questions that you need to about opening bank accounts. Every bank is a little different. So we are not telling you what you should have to open a bank account. We're strongly encouraging you to meet with whichever bank that you want to open an account with and find out what they need. We do know that a tax ID number is required no matter which bank you go to. All the other requirements could differ from bank to bank to bank. So I just encourage you to reach out to that bank, ask them questions, and I think that's the best advice that I can give. Oh, and the most important advice, and this is true of anything related to your organization, when you open your account, please save the name of the bank that you opened your account with, any other information they need to know about it, and your tax ID number in your TERP page. And the reason I say that is because the number one question my office gets, aside from how do I apply for SJ money, is how do I access my bank account? Where is my bank account and what's my tax ID number? Because we don't have access to that, we can never help you with that. And we don't know where to send you to answer those questions because we don't know where your organization may have saved that. You saved it in a Google Drive or you had a binder. If you save it to your TERP page, then your future members can always access that. If you're not comfortable doing that, give it to your advisor. Make sure your advisor has that. And if nothing else, before you transition your leadership role to the incomings, is take them to the bank, call your bank and say, what can we do to transfer the signers now? So everybody knows which bank you've got, how to get to, how to access the bank account, get the bank account out of your name because you're possibly graduating. But please save it to TERP because what I'd love to do is one day open up your TERP, like a group's TERP page and say, let's see if they saved it to your page and see it there and be able to say, here it is. I haven't done that yet. Maybe I should offer a prize to the first group that saves their stuff to their TERP page.
Val, can you quickly, as quick as you can, go over how to get a tax ID number for people who are looking to open bank accounts?
More important than, so there is a link. It's issued by the IRS. I had no idea what a tax ID number was until we started going to CQ workshops. If you think about it this way, it's like a social security number for your organization. There's no getting around having a tax ID number, and the federal banking laws require that it have that because every dollar that goes into your bank account gets reported to the IRS. So that's what a tax ID number is. It's issued by the IRS. There's a link to the IRS website to apply for a tax ID number right from our website. It is free to do. It is instantaneous. But that's also why it's incredibly important that you save that information for your future leadership, because it's not like giving away your social security number. So if you somehow lose it, I think the IRS will issue a new one under a different name. I don't know, but those are the details, but we have links to the IRS's website. We also have a link to the site on the IRS page that says, what do I do if I can't find my number and I lost it? They can pull that up. The bank should, I will say this, I tell every group to do this, because you need a tax ID number to open a bank account. The bank should be able to give you that tax ID number because it should be associated with your account. I've heard rumors that Capital One, which was the bank that was in the stamp eons ago and where some groups still have their account, the Capital One refuses to give the tax ID number to groups. I don't know why, which is also why I tell you to keep a copy of your own. My understanding is CQ gladly gives it to you, but since you can't count on that, you want to save it. But you can get to the IRS website from our website, and also a link to how to reach out to the IRS if you can't find your tax ID number.
So, noticing our time, we are almost at 6. I did place in the chat, you should have all received a link to, let's see, the sample budget. We, for interest of time, are just going to leave that link there for you to reference. And then, like Val said, if you all have questions, reach out to her office. You can set up a meeting with Val herself or with the finance team, her student staff. So we definitely encourage you to do that if you have further questions. I'm trying to monitor the chat to see if there are any other questions. If anyone else has anything that they'd like to add, while I'm looking at the chat, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. And just to reiterate again, this presentation will be made available on YouTube, and for all of you who did join, we will make sure to send you this PowerPoint slide.
And I'll figure out a way to put it on our website. Again, right now, just me, so I might not get to it right away. I think my parting words to you are, again, one, if you're here because you have lots of questions about applying for SGA money, please reach out to the SGA. They should be posting, they should have virtual office hours. The CFO for the finance committee has committee members and himself monitoring their email. Try not to reach out to my office to ask questions about it, because sometimes my staff tries to be helpful and answer questions about how to apply for money and what SGA's rules are. And they shouldn't do that because they don't know if a rule has changed. But you contributed to the money, you paid $80 into that. Make SGA do their job and help you fill out budget applications and answer any questions you have. I strongly encourage you to review the sample budget that I put together. It focuses, I've been advising the finance committee now for 10 years. I focused on everything in that budget application that groups have struggled with and just to provide very clear directions about how to fill that out appropriately and what all of those things mean. And that is a great resource. If you're not the one filling out the budget application, pass it on to whoever's going to be doing that for your club or your organization. And then in terms of spending your money, please, 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 just reach out to our office if you have any questions whatsoever. I get that it's confusing. It's a bureaucracy, and you're lucky that we're the middleman between you and the people who facilitate all those payments, because they're not so helpful or friendly. But we're here to answer those questions. But if you don't reach out to us and we can help you, then we don't want you struggling. That's what we're here for. And so take advantage of us and ask tons of questions. We like answering.
Like Val said, please reach out to SGA, to us in SORC Finance, depending on your question, and we can always point you in the right direction. But thank you so much, Val, for joining us this evening and helping enlightening us with everything finance. Hopefully we see a lot of budget applications come through. But thank you all for joining us as well. And we look forward to seeing you in our next workshop. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.